that feeling abandoned is different than being abandoned. Feeling abandoned is different than being abandoned. Now, listen, are you guys ready to do a little theological heavy lifting with me today? Okay? This is big. This is big. And if you get it, this will make such a difference in your faith, such a difference in your life. But we got to get there. Okay? We got to get there. So, we're going to do this together. I'm going to start here. Let me ask you this, and I want you to really think about this for a minute. Was Jesus actually forsaken by God on the cross? Or did he just feel that way? Did he just feel that way? Now, I understand and I know that this takes us into a whole different conversation about sin and salvation and how a holy God can't abide sin. And the way we say it a lot of times to each other in the church in really simplistic kinds of terms is that as Jesus took the weight of sin onto his shoulders, that God had to forsake him. God had to abandon him in that moment, because to continue to remain connected to Jesus would be for God to somehow be connected to sin. And yet, I just kick this can around the block with me, okay? If that's really true, then at what point did God the Father look down at Jesus and say, that's enough time served, I'm going to resurrect him now? If that's true, that God abandoned Jesus on the cross, then how or why is there a resurrection at all? If it's true that God abandoned Jesus on the cross, then why does the psalmist say in the Bible that even if I make my bed in the depths of hell, that God, you are there? In other words, I cannot go anywhere in the earth, above the earth, or below the earth, that your presence isn't there. I can't do anything without you willing me to exist at all times. He knows the numbers of hair on my head in the days that I am the holiest, and he knows the numbers of hairs on my head at my days that I am my most unholy. The Bible says that this is love. Not that we loved God, but that he loved us. Listen, you didn't take a holy water bath before God sent Jesus and then he was like, okay, good, they're clean, now I can love them. That's not how that worked. He loved you and he sent Jesus to you in your sin before you even knew what the bath was. Okay? In the words of Paul, Romans 5:8, while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. That means that God saw you in your sin. He knew you in your sin. He sees you in your brokenness, and he's an ever-present. That means always, all the time present, help in times of trouble. The trouble isn't the evidence that God has abandoned you. The trouble is just the circumstance that God is with you in. Are you with me so far? You're doing good. You're doing good. Jesus did take on the sin of the world. Jesus did take the punishment that we had coming. And as he put that weight up onto his back, and he marches that backpack full of boulders to a cross, I can't even imagine. I can't even comprehend what that must have felt like. I can't even I don't even have a concept for how dark that forest was, how lonely that was, how far away from home Jesus must have felt in that moment as darkness is covering the land and he's taking his last breaths. I can't even begin to understand how that must have felt and how abandoned by God Jesus must have felt. I'm just asking a question. I know he says he's feeling forsaken and abandoned, but if Jesus really was abandoned, then how are any of us still talking about this 2,000 years later? Is God that fickle? That he abandons people one minute, unabandons them the next, he just changes his mind on a dime? Or is it possible that as Jesus takes on the sin of the world on a cross, and he could see nothing but woods and darkness and pain and suffering, that he feels abandoned, when the whole time, God is already working in him and dealing with sin and death in a final way. That there is a kind of spiritual surgery going on in this transaction that hurts like hell itself. And it's going to bring those in Jesus closer to heaven. Did God really abandon Jesus? Or did Jesus feel abandoned? This is the reason why when somebody's struggling in their life, sometimes Christians we're so quick to judge them. And we say things like, well, they've got a hidden sin. They just got a hidden sin in their life. They got to work that out. It's all hidden, but it's a sin. And you can tell because God isn't with them. Right? We do that with each other. We assign that to them. Like, well, the reason they're going through what they're going through must be because of some, I don't know, like sin issue that they have that no one knows about. Isn't the message of the Bible that everyone has a sin issue? Right? What makes their hidden sin issue different than the sin of pride by which you are judging them? Right? You know, one of the hardest parts about being lost in the woods of abandonment is being consumed by the feelings of it. It's one of the hardest parts. You know what I mean? Like, on the one hand, there's the actual problem of being lost. There's the logistical, strategical issue that I do not know how to get back from where I am. So I've got to figure this out a little bit. How am I going to get home? How am I going to fix this relationship? What am I going to do with this marriage? How am I going to treat this sickness? What direction? Like, I got to pick one. Do I go from here? How do I handle this problem logistically and strategically? These are big questions in and of themselves, right? But they're not the most consuming part of the problem, are they? They're not. The real consuming part is our feelings about the problem. When you really start to get up into that feeling of being truly on your own and nobody's coming to save me, and this problem, this cross that I've got to bear, that I've got to take on, this issue, this relationship, this grief, this thing, whatever that thing is, you start feeling the weight of that. And you feel like it's all on you to figure it out or die trying, and you're not even getting the results that you want to see in your prayers. I mean, come on, that's a hard feeling, isn't it? That's a hard, lonely feeling. That's when panic starts setting in and anxiety starts to spike. When I was lost, when I was out in the woods, I mean, if I were to judge the situation by my feelings, I would have guessed that the cabin is 100 miles away. Right? I just would have. And I've got no hope. I've got no hope of ever getting back. I had no idea. I was just a 10-minute walk away and that my dad and my uncles were already starting to talk about coming to look for me. No idea. I mean, listen, in my mind, it's like I hope somebody finds my body before the wolves all get me in the spring. I'm dead. This is over. I might as well be lost on the side of Everest. You know what I mean? And listen, here's why. Because when you feel abandoned, it's almost never a feeling. It's almost never a feeling that's based in theology, that's based in faith, and it's not even based in the Bible. In fact, in the Bible itself, do you know what the most common command is? The most common command in all of the Bible is be not afraid, for God is with you. It is the most commonly repeated command in the entire scriptures, over 365 times in the scriptures. There is some form of a fear not, for I am with. There's some form of this. That's one for every day of the year. You could hang your hat on that. That's a fear not for every day of the year. Well, if God has really abandoned me, then why would he repeat fear not more than anything else in the entire Bible? Listen, I'm not discounting what you've been through. All I'm suggesting to you is that feeling abandoned by God, most of the time, is based on external circumstances that didn't go the way that we wanted it to or think it should. A parent abandoned the family, therefore God abandoned me. Right? Someone you love gets sick and dies an untimely death. God abandoned me. A spouse leaves you. God abandoned me. God hasn't cured my addiction yet. God must have abandoned me. My work life sucks because God abandoned me. Do you see how this goes? We make these associations. External circumstances create the woods that we live in, and internal feelings respond to it by feeling abandoned, even though you might not be as far away from home as you think, and search parties are already coming out for you. Feeling abandoned isn't the same as being abandoned. Are you with me so far? Are you with me so far? Okay, let's move on to the second piece we got to learn from this, because it's just as important.